Alrighty, I am showing 9:30 on the dot, so we will go ahead and kick things off. Good morning, hello everyone, and welcome to the American Family Insurance DreamBank, where we believe in the transformative power of dreams. My name is Andy Frisky. I work here at DreamBank. I'm so excited to have you all with us here today. We always like to poll our audience when we kick things off. If you're comfortable in doing so, we encourage you to share where you're tuning in from in the chats. It's always nice getting to see where people are joining us here from today. If this is a repeat event or you've been with DreamBank before, welcome back. If this is your first time, would love to take a few moments and introduce you. So here at American Family Insurance, we believe that communities are stronger and the future is brighter when people are actively pursuing their dreams. And that's why DreamBank was created just over 10 years ago. It's an inspirational community destination and digital experience that is dedicated to dreamers everywhere. Our offerings are designed to help you celebrate the dream journey, overcome obstacles, and to stay motivated. Got a couple comments coming in about audio. If you can hear my voice, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. If not, send me a private message. But yeah, okay, I'm getting some thumbs up. So I know I've gotten a couple messages yet, so I'll look into that. But it looks like folks are able to hear me. Couple housekeeping items before we kick things off. Again, I want to thank you all for taking the time out of your day to join us here. As I mentioned earlier, Warren's got a lot to share. Be kicking it over him to here shortly. But that you made the conscious effort to sign up for this class or this event, and this is not a class, you know. So if you're able to have your cameras on, your microphones on, I know that Warren's going to be asking some engagement questions along the way, and that will certainly help with the overall quality of the presentation. And yeah, so this event is being recorded. It will be on our YouTube page shortly after the event, so look for that there. I'll go ahead and drop the link in the chat, but without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Warren Cook of TAHR Services. He will be chatting a little bit about the power of preparation and interviewing with an impact. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Warren. Warren.
Andy, thank you. Good morning. I appreciate it. I'm excited to be here, and I'm glad you're all here with me today as well. I'm going to jump right into it, but just quickly, my name is Warren Cook. I've been in the HR space a little over 28 years, and I've interviewed and hired lots of people. So the goal here is really making sure that I can transfer that knowledge over to you. So I want to talk about my goals in this session. I want to really cover why I hope you're here today and make sure that aligns with why you're here. We're going to go through the interview process itself and some context around that and make sure that everybody kind of has a good feeling of the different styles and types of interviewing and the interview process itself, and also why some things happen in the interview process. Articulating your value, that differentiation, that's the biggest piece here, right? Making sure that you understand how you articulate the culmination of who you are during that interview process to achieve the success that you're targeting and trying to achieve. We're going to go through strategies and tips on interviewing success, and all these are practical strategies, practical tips. You could start doing it immediately with friends, family, actual interviews or whatnot. And then I want to spend just a couple minutes on post-pandemic workforce and make sure I share some strategies and guidance there. For the most part, you can throw any questions in the chat. I will ask at times if anybody wants to chime in and just respond or share your thoughts or opinions, or if you have a question. Usually after each slide that where I'm sharing topic, I'll ask if there are any questions, because really we want to make sure that you get those questions answered. For me, it's really about sharing practical wisdom. So I've been obviously an applicant through my career. I've been on the HR side of designing talent acquisition programs. I've been on the consulting side of advising clients. I've been on the coaching side of advising applicants, and I've owned and operated staffing and talent acquisition firms. So I've seen every side, both in private and public sector. So it's really about sharing a lot of those strategies with all of you today. I want to make sure that I give you examples. I want it to be engaging. Obviously, the larger the group gets, sometimes it's harder to have everybody have an opportunity. I promise at the end, I'm able to, as long as DreamBank allows it, I'm able to stay on as long as you have some questions, reasonably, and then we can go from there. The post-pandemic advice is really important for me because I think a lot of job postings I'm seeing out there can be very misleading. So I cover that just because I want to make sure you're armed with the questions and information you need to really weed through that. And then at the end of the day, I just want to prepare you for success. So that's my goals today. For you, I'm hoping you're here to really enhance your ability to interview more effectively, add more tools and tips in your toolbox. All of you are capable of interviewing. All of you probably have interviewed, of course, but I just want to enhance those skills and abilities the best I can. So it's about improving your ability to secure those interviews and really think about that alignment. How do you ensure you get that job offer or do the process successfully? Enhancing your ability to articulate during the interview. And what you'll hear me say over and over during this process is with larger applicant pools and lots of people, there's always someone with more experience or a better looking resume. It's really about how can you articulate your value and differentiate from those other applicants. And we're going to dive into that pretty heavily. And then I just want to learn and empower you on how you do that. How do you go about doing that differentiation? So hopefully these are your goals today. If there's something specific outside of this that you think, okay, I really am here also for this, feel free to drop it in the chat. And then at one point, I'll ask Andy to share any of those with me so I can cover those for you. So jumping into the interview process, and I want to talk about what it is and why it exists. And when I think about this, have you ever just walked up to somebody, handed your resume, and they turn around and hand you an offer letter? It's pretty unlikely in this century. It doesn't really happen. And so years ago, maybe you went into a small business or you went into an organization, you knew somebody, and suddenly you had a conversation, there was an offer, and that really doesn't happen anymore. And so I want you to consider these two questions as I go through the next few slides and share some opinion and some perspective here. You know, for you personally, do you feel or do you believe that the interview process itself, right, not an interview, but the whole process, is it an inclusive process or is it an exclusive process, right? What are they trying to do through that? So just think about that and let that resonate while we go to the next slide here. And then what is the purpose of them even conducting an interview? Why do they bother doing it? Or why do they put you through the ringer of 5 rounds of interviews, right? So these are the two questions I want you to think about as we go through these next few slides. When I think about the interview process, I view it, my perspective is it's an exclusive process. And so the reason I feel it's an exclusive process is that you have a pool of applicants like this pyramid or triangle, whatever you want to call it. And at the top here is your largest pool of applicants. In this day and age, most people will get, for a position that's more generalized, 50, 100, 250 applicants for every position. And their goal at the bottom, at the end of the day, is potentially to fill one position, right? Hire one person for that role. So their job, their mission is to eliminate everybody who doesn't fit and everyone who they don't want to hire. So when organizations are building the process, and I talk to a lot of people every week that are frustrated that I applied and I never heard back, or I applied and I got rejected in 5 minutes. There's no way, something's wrong. They're lying. It's not a real job. It's because in order to execute this funnel effectively for organizations, they've implemented a lot of strategies and also use technology nowadays. So when you have a full pool of applicants, the first thing that the employer is trying to do is weed out any applicant who doesn't show on paper or through their responses to questions that they're minimally qualified, meaning meeting the minimally qualified job postings. So job postings nowadays should have the minimum requirements of the position. You'll see out there that there are some really well-written job descriptions that usually let you know more about the organization, that they've got their act together. And then you might just see something that says looking for an engineer. I mean, you know, might not help. But first thing that's happening generally in those applicant tracking systems, if you have to go in and fill out questions, is it uses your responses to eliminate you. So if they have a minimum qualification of 3 years of experience plus a bachelor's degree and you answer you don't have a bachelor's degree, you can expect about 30 seconds later to get a rejection. Because once you answer those questions, the system kicks you out because you didn't meet. So to me, it's excluding you at every stage. It's excluding you through the process. And once they have a pool of minimally qualified applicants, then the organization's job is, okay, now how do we whittle this down to the top candidates? So that second tier means anybody in that tier could be hired if they actually have the experience. Now it's like, all right, now let me find the cream of the crop, the best, the top. Again, recognize that this whole process happens without you speaking to them, right? This is on paper. So when we go through some of the strategies here, the resume is your first piece, right? That's representing who you are. If you don't have that well established and you're not answering these questions effectively in their applicant tracking system, or you ignore the process, you probably won't get past it. But then you move into the first round interview or first round screening and then the interview process and other things we're going to talk about in a minute. But now you're narrowing down. So I just want you to know that when you go and apply for a job, that company, that employer is not sitting on the other side saying, yay, they applied. I can't wait to bring them in. They're actually on the reverse trying to exclude applicants because of this day and age's volume. So hopefully that makes sense. If there are any questions about this model, go ahead and throw it in the chat. I'm going to go to the next slide. And then Andy, if there is anything about this model, I'd love to answer it while I'm in this area here. But going about the purpose of the interview, like why does an employer even do an interview process? Well, here's 3 things, in my opinion, that are reasons they will do it. The first is to be compliant. We're in an age of litigation, right? Very litigious environment. And so it's very often that someone who doesn't get hired might file a lawsuit, or they go through an interview process and accuse the employer of some type of discrimination during the process, or maybe even systemic discrimination. So the reason you might find you go online, you submit an application, then you have an interview, then another interview, and it's a lot of questions and back and forth, it's because they are trying to protect the process for themselves. Okay, so that's one of the main reasons that someone will conduct an interview process, and they do it consistently for every single applicant. So years ago, you'd say, oh, my cousin works at the company, here's my resume, hand it in. If I was at that organization, when they hand me that resume, it goes in the trash, because I can't accept something outside of my established compliant process, which those types of practices have made it harder for every one of you to kind of navigate and get through. It's a way to get the same information from everybody. So if you think about a resume versus an application, every one of the people on this call now, we've got 53 people on here, every single individual has a different resume. Even if you all had the same experience, it's going to be different, right? But an application allows the employer to collect the same information from everybody. Okay. So a lot of times, especially if you apply for state or federal government, or even local government agencies, they will say, do not write "see resume" on the application, because the application is required on their end to compare applicants, and the resume is kind of an extra. Where in private industry, usually it's the reverse. But just know that's why they're asking for an application, and it is very good for you to make sure you complete it if it's an online applicant tracking system in ATS, versus just saying "see resume," because they could literally discount you because they could say you didn't follow their process. And then it just allows management to hopefully identify the most qualified people for their position. So if they didn't have an interview process, if they didn't have those interview panels staffed with the right experts, they wouldn't be able to discern whether you're a fit to be successful in the role. So I'm going to pause there. Andy, were there any questions in the chat that
Nothing yet, Warren. Nothing
okay,
yet.
perfect. Okay, great. Well, feel free to do that, folks, and or come off mute and just ask the question if we do. So now, how do they conduct these interviews? A lot of different ways, right? But I want to highlight a couple things here, because I've had individuals get frustrated or upset when they got that call from an employer and then nothing else happened. So in this day and age, if you think about it, when I was with Lincoln Financial Group, and that was several years ago, we used to get 90,000 applications a month. Okay, so you don't get back to everybody, but what would happen is, and this happens now still today, maybe they get 150 applicants and someone has to weed through it. And from the date you apply to the date they actually get through it to find out who they like could be a couple weeks. I mean, realistically, that's what's happening nowadays, unfortunately. So if a couple weeks go by before they schedule you for an interview, they will often do a screening. Now, different organizations call it different things, but generally it could be an intern or an HR professional or someone lower in the organization is tasked with calling those top candidates they're interested in interviewing. And they simply say, "Hi, Jane or John Doe. Are you still interested in ABC company? Are you still seeking this role? Are you still available for an interview? What's your availability? And are you still looking for this type of compensation? Great. We're going to get you scheduled." They do that because if they jump right into sending you out an invitation for an interview and you've already taken another job because some other company was faster, they're kind of wasting their time. So just be aware, this doesn't happen all the time, but if a process is dragging out, they sometimes will do that screening. And when that happens, your job is to try to get as much information out of that screener as possible. What is your timing of actually scheduling the interviews? Do you know who the interview panel will be? Do you know the target start date for this? So sometimes they won't have any of that information, but if you're able to leverage that some human being called you, take advantage of it. And then you should go through an initial interview. Often that might be done by human resources or someone that's doing some kind of general behavioral interview. First round interviews, when they're really structured and planned out, will not be as heavily focused on the technical skills of the role, but it'll be more focused on behavioral interviewing and to understand and learn how you perform your work. So not what you performed, but how you performed it. And when we talk about behavioral interviewing and cover that, I'm really going to kind of dive into that more. But that's usually what happens before that final interview or a technical interview. So an example is you might be interviewing for a project management role or an engineering role or an architect role, whatever it might be, and IT manager, whatever. The first round might be someone who you yourself might think, wow, they don't really know much about my job. They don't really know much about what I do. And you think, wow, that might not be a great interview because this person, I don't know, have no idea why they were interviewing me. That probably was not a technical interview. It's probably more of a behavioral interview. When you get on that final interview where it's a panel interview or a couple people or they series it, and suddenly you're talking to the director of technology, or you're talking to a senior engineer, or you're talking to somebody like that, they've now put a subject matter expert in the mix in order to determine your technical capabilities. So picking up whether you're on a behavioral interview or a technical interview is really important for you, because if you're on a behavioral interview and everything you respond is really highly technical, that might be advantageous, but you might not be hitting the mark in what they're looking for, why they're conducting that interview. And then vice versa. If somebody's you find out that the interview panel is either your manager or a manager's manager, or they brought in some SME, and you don't dive deep in your responses, you might not move forward, because what you didn't understand or might not have recognized was that a very technical individual who knows what you should be capable of doing for the role was interviewing you. So those are the types of pieces that will come through as a stage. From a format perspective, you could have individual or panel, and there's a lot of perspective out there on which is better. I prefer panel interviews. It saves the applicant time from telling their story 10 times. It saves the panel from having to ask each other, what did they tell you? But some organizations, based on scheduling, will still do individual interviews. Sometimes it's a power trip to say, oh, you have to interview with this person next. But don't let panel interviews scare you, because there's strategies I'll share with you later on that can really help you determine if it's the type of organization you want to work at, if it's the type of culture and environment, if they're going to be honest and transparent in an interview with your questions. And then multiple rounds. When I work with organizations, I try to have 2 rounds, the behavioral round and then that panel with a technical expert. However, if you're interviewing for a higher level role, it's very likely you might have to interview a 3rd round with an executive, a CEO, a member of the leadership team. But if a position is, not even a people leader role, or it's not very high and it's not a very large organization, and suddenly you have a 3rd round interview and a 4th round interview and then a meet the team interview, that should be an indication, not necessarily that it's a bad job or a bad company, but it lets you know that they don't have their act together. They don't have an effective way to make decisions. They're now trying to get consensus. They're now trying to have 8 different people chime in on whether or not you should be hired. And that should be a flag for you to know that either you going into the organization will help fix that, or that it might be really hard to find out when you're going to get that job, because they're interviewing, 12 people for 15 rounds of interviews, and it might take forever to get back to you. So those are some of the things to understand just about the process itself. And if you have a question on that, feel free to throw it in the chat or chime in and ask that. So now let's switch gears and really talk about the crux of, right, how do we differentiate? How do we make sure that you are going to achieve your goal through the process? So think about this. Take a look at this chart. I'll let it sink in for a minute. But when I do interviewing, a lot of times the person talks about themselves for an hour. And I did this, and I did this, and I did this, and I did this, and I'm the best at everything I do, and I'm great, and that's why you should hire me. And that's generally not the person I hire. I look for individuals who understand that the reason I'm filling that position is because I need them to bring their skills and experience to add value to my organization, to help me deliver my products and services, to help me make more revenue, to help me grow my profit, to help me solve some problem. So if all you do is talk about yourself and you're unable to link why what you do is valuable to them, you're actually missing an opportunity there. And so this is an example of some things that a business is thinking about, a business cares about, right? They care about making more money. They care about how they can add value to their products and services. They want to make their product more productive, or they need a more productive workforce. And because you're a people leader, they're really trying to figure out, are you the right people leader to help that happen? Maybe they're working on building their brand. They're trying to connect with their employees more effectively. All organizations are generally trying to manage those expenses, right? Watch their liability, and then organizations now have missions that are really socially responsible. So if you didn't research the organization, if you didn't learn anything about the company you're applying for and what these challenges are or what their mission is right now to achieve these, you're going to fail in connecting why you're the fit. And so if you think about it, you go in an interview, you talk all about yourself, and you've got tons of experience, and they don't offer you the job. But someone else who had similar resume to you went in there and could articulate why their experience helps that employer achieve these goals, they're going to get the offer and you don't. So it's no longer just about what your experience and skills are. It's about how you're going to bring those skills and how you're going to bring that information to the employer, right? Add value to that employer. Were there any questions on this, Andy?
Yeah, there's one that just came in, Warren. So this one's from
Perfect.
Sophia. Regarding making questions during and screening interview, I find it difficult selecting what to ask. Do you have any suggestions or examples of questions to ask at this stage when the interviewer might not be so familiar with the responsibilities of the role?
Yeah, I actually have, and Sophia, thanks for that question. Great question. I cover that at near the end of this presentation, so I will dive into that. But I'm going to go through questions that recognize that you're on an interview and they're going to ask you a lot of questions, and either nerves, jitters, intimidation, or just the fact that like your life and future and your revenue depends on this job. We get nervous and some people jump off a call before the interview, before they ask what they need to. Never forget that you should be interviewing the employer as much as they are interviewing you. So when I think about questions for the position, the job posting, job description, if well written, should have outlined the roles and responsibilities relatively okay. But when I get to the point of kind of going, hey, what questions do you have for us? And I'm going to talk more about this later, but I'll address it now too, is what are the greatest challenges to the incumbent in this role? Were there successes or failures by the prior incumbent that led to this position being open? Are there challenges that the organization is facing that are going to make it difficult for the person in this position to succeed? How does engagement and communication happen with this position? And who are the collaborators and stakeholders related to this role that I would need to work with? When you start getting some of these answers, it's going to start painting a picture of the role, of what they're trying to accomplish, of what their challenges are, or what their risks are, or they've been successful and they're just adding another, right? Oh, no, our team is great. We're just growing, so we want to add another person. So you can find out some more details about the role, but early on in the process, especially in that first round, if there is a first round, if the job description wasn't clear, I would ask them to specifically say, what are the expectations of the role and what are you hoping this person can succeed at or contribute to? What's the value add? When I would design an interview panel, I literally had the hiring manager, because of this issue, and I wanted to have the best interview for my business and clients possible, I would have the hiring manager describe the role from their perspective to the applicant. So a good question to ask at the beginning of the process is, can you please describe what the process is going to entail? And then you can look at, which one of you are the hiring manager? Is it going to report to you? Great. Can you walk me through what your expectations of the position are? And don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to ask, right? Because the worst I could say is, oh, we'll tell you later, or, that's inappropriate. And then you get to realize maybe these aren't people I want to work for. But hopefully, Sophia, that helps and addresses that. But I'm going to dive into the questions to ask also a little later on. Were there any other before I move on, Andy? Was it good?
I think that's all that has come in at this time.
Perfect. Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, Sophia. So resume to interview. So everything starts with your resume. And a lot of people, you can hire someone to write your resume. You can have people review your resume. You can go on the internet and grab stuff. I will tell you that in the 28 years I've been doing HR, I've never written a resume for somebody. I meet with somebody. I will walk through asking them questions about their experience. And then I'll look at the piece of paper and say, well, do you realize nothing you just told me is on this piece of paper? So the resume is the starting point. If you can articulate your value and experience on your resume, it will then translate onto how you speak during the interview. So the more effective you can show your value, the more effective you can use situation, action, results SAR, the more effective you can really capture what you did for a last employer with your experience, the more effective you'll be able to talk about it. Okay. So how you write it turns into how you speak about it, and then it turns into how you present it and how confident you are when you discuss it in an interview. And then you really want to make sure it's aligned and that you reflect on what you're trying to present and communicate about your experience. And then you should always practice, right? Once you have that resume drafted, you should be practicing talking about it with friends, family, somebody who can help give you feedback on how you articulate it. But let's talk about the resume itself. So there's a lot of myths out there that say your resume can't be more than 1 page or 2 page. My resume is 5 pages long. If you are in the pharmaceutical space, or you're in the life sciences, or you're in the academic space, you're going to use a CV. That CV could be 25 pages long, showing all your presentations, showing all your dissertation work, showing all your papers you've written, journals, articles. So it's more important to think about what you're trying to articulate and present for that role. The way you can shorten your resume and not duplicate and repeat over and over is to think about and consider, okay, so the first 5 jobs in my career that were 20 some years ago, they really just gave me skills to do jobs that are more recent. And so I usually list 3 or 4 past jobs, and then I have a section that simply says ABC job, here's my title, dates. Here's my job. Here's my title, dates. Here's my job, because it doesn't really matter. And I'm going to tell you why in a few minutes, but it doesn't matter to go back 8 jobs, 10 jobs, and have 8 paragraphs about it. So that's one thing. And the reason you don't go back that far, and there's no need to, is one, you don't want to have the dates on there. Two, there's a lot of people that bias or discriminate against people over 40. Another reason is you are a culmination of everything in your life when you sit on that interview. So when someone asks me questions during an interview, tell me about X, I don't say, well, at ABC company, I did this. They don't care, and I shouldn't care that I did it at ABC company. I should just be presenting my skills, my success, my value, my contributions, because it doesn't matter where it was. My personal and professional life together culminate into who I am today, and that's what they're hiring, or hopefully hiring. So you want to show them that as of today, I bring everything in my experience forward, and this is the value you're going to get. It's not about, oh, well, in 2007, I worked for this company. Well, they're not hiring the person from 2007. They're hiring you today. Try to use situation, action, results, or situation, action, response. I refer to as SAR. There's always so many things out there, SAR, whatever. This is what I've used in my book. This is what I've used when I coach people. But the people that do this the best naturally are salespeople. I don't know if I've ever seen a sales resume where it didn't say top 5 salesperson, sold $400 million of this, won this award. They naturally have a way of just saying their successes. But if I look at a project manager, an IT manager, a nurse's resume, I don't see the same thing. I don't see where that individual, that professional, took what was the situation, what they did about it, and then the value for the business. So if someone even says, oh, I was a people leader, led 5 people. Well, that doesn't tell me anything. But if someone were to put on their resume, was responsible for hiring, setting expectations, professional development, growth, and accountability, resulting in 3 of my team members being promoted, that tells a whole different story in the same bullet, right? First, it tells you can explain what you do differently, but then you've shared a result, you've shared a situation, you've shared what you did with your skills. So SAR is really important. Do not use your resume to present as a job description. If I look at someone's resume and it says responsible for this, supported this, it tells me you basically took what your job posted or a job description and you threw it on a piece of paper and said that's what you did. A job description, if you write your resume that way, it only tells me what you were supposed to do, not what you actually did. So if you're not able to even put on your resume what you did versus what you were supposed to do, how are you going to do that effectively on an interview? Okay. I highly recommend removing any dates of education on a resume. Unless someone on this call can prove to me that you'll see a job posting that says looking for a finance manager with an accounting degree from 1983, which would be illegal and will never happen, remove the dates of employment. I sometimes will recommend to recent graduates to put their date of graduation, or if they're in that last timeline and they're trying to apply for jobs and line it up before they graduate, they might say graduation date is, but that's about it to secure and make sure there's evidence that they're graduating. But other than that, you are listing education on there just to meet the qualifications of the role. If it requires a master's degree, your resume should say, have a master's degree from this school and this type of degree. So dates are not critical or important, and I would remove them because too many people out there discriminate. Whether you like it or not, people will go, oh, they graduated in 1983. I don't know if I want to hire this person. So just remove the dates because that's not the requirement. The requirement is just the degree. I recommend that you should always have some kind of summary or objective on your resume at the top. I've shied away from recommending an objective because nowadays when you've got to apply to 50 or 100 jobs a month through applicant tracking systems, and you never know who's even going to respond because there's so many applicants out there and so much activity, you'd be changing your resume every day to make sure it matches the title or the job responsibilities. It's probably more effective and more efficient to summarize the value you bring to an organization through your skills and experience. So definitely recommend more of a summary than objective. I always recommend not listing references. Now, a lot of applicant tracking systems out there require you to have references when you put it in there. I'll sometimes just put the same name and number 3 times and make them call, but I never list it on a resume because I'm not going to give them free information to reach out to people, to talk to people, to do any kind of checks. First of all, in most states and federally, you're not allowed to do these background checks and reference checks until you make a verbal offer. You have to make a contingent offer based on the qualifications. So giving them this information and allowing them to reach out or talk to people ahead of time is not good for you. Further, if you just say references available upon request, it allows you to have some level of control that they don't get them unless they engage with you. And then sequencing your experience and don't duplicate. I'll give you an example of what I mean here. So at some point in my career, if I was a recruiter and then I was a senior recruiter, then I was a team leader, then I was a manager, then I was the director of recruiting. And when I'm the director of recruiting on my resume, I don't need to put on there call applicants and screen candidates because I should have already described that when I did it, right back at the lower level. So a resume has very limited space to articulate your value, and they're going to review it in less than a minute. So if you can show progression by how you articulate the bullets and information on your resume, you can show progression, growth, complexity of work and experience without repeating things over and over. Even if you're in the same role in a different company, you move from this position to that position, same title, there's probably different systems, different responsibilities, different projects, maybe different products or service you worked on. So try and highlight that versus just using the same bullet over and over. And then document gaps. There's nothing worse than to be prepared for an interview, get ready to talk about your experience, and they go, so were you unemployed between this time and this time? 2020 and 2022? I mean, yeah, it was called COVID. We were all unemployed. We're all out of work. But so I always recommend to put something there because if they move past that and get to the interview stage, generally they're not even going to bother asking about it. But if you move forward to the interview stage for some reason and you had gaps, you're opening the door for them to waste time during the interview to ask about it. And I don't see any negatives in all the years I've been doing it. I don't have any problem with saying unemployed, out of work, searching for a job, taking classes, taking care of the family. Like, okay, that's life. You will have hiring managers or HR professionals who certainly don't handle that well. But I highly recommend not leaving any gaps. And then don't misrepresent because at any point in time on an application through the process, an employer can terminate employment if they find that you misrepresented any part of your experience or documentation through the interview process. And be sure to complete an application if it's an applicant tracking system. So go in there and take a look at it. Before I move to the next slide, I'm going to see, I don't know,
Yeah,
Andy, if there
tons of questions for this one. I've been reading through,
Yep.
so I'm going to try and Warren was able to address some of these, so I apologize if maybe it didn't answer the question the way you're hoping to. Please go ahead and comment after this, but just for the sake of time, I'm just going to try and cover some of the stuff
summarize.
that was
Yeah.
So this one's from Mark. Does your experience need to tie into an opportunity listed on the vacancy posting or within the PD?
Within the PD?
PD is what? Mark, are you able to come off mute and clarify? All right, we'll go on for
Yeah.
the.
So when you're looking at a job description that's posted or a posting, your minimum qualification should align. But for me, I look at the summary of your experience. So I don't try to custom my resume to match the lines of a job posting. If we were back in the age and time where you might apply for 3 jobs and you're going to get 2 calls, maybe. But now with so many postings, so much information out there, and so many applicants, it's more about making sure you're highlighting your successes and the skills you use to create that value for the employer. And then the person on the other side of the table, when they review that, they're seeing the alignment. So your resume doesn't have to say, I've done this for 4 years. If they're looking at what roles you had and when you had them, it's going to let them know that you've done it for 4 years as an example. But we can come back to that if you want to clarify the PD part. I'm not sure what that part is. Next one.
Next one's from Sherry. So she's asking about the dates. So should you list dates of education or basically, so don't list dates of education or dates of employment? I think she's asking.
Dates of employment, yes. Dates
Okay.
of education, no.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I would list your dates of employment for sure, because that's one of the things they'll be doing when they do a background check. Generally, if they're doing an employment check, they'll have the background company just verify, did you work there during that time period? Now, if you don't remember whether it was June or July when you started, that's not really misrepresentation. But if I call and find out you never even worked there, that's misrepresentation. So I would include the dates. If it's farther back, you could just put the years. In more recent jobs, you could put the months if you want. But I don't get hung up on that when I'm reviewing a resume. I'm more focused on the content. Now, if I need to make sure that they have 6 years experience and I see 2 jobs between now and 2022, I know they don't have 6 years experience because I go, well, the first job was in 22 and we require 6 years experience. In the applicant tracking system, they checked, yes, they have 6 years experience. The resume isn't supporting that. So that's the alignment I meant about making sure you align your application, your responses to your resume. But for the most part, I would never, ever put dates on the education. Even certifications and classes. I'll see people that'll list, all these certifications and classes they took over the years. And I'm like, does it matter when you took it? You clearly passed it, completed it, and now have that knowledge. So you're using that knowledge in what you do. So again, it's less important to have the date for education or classes or courses, and it's more important to actually just have it and articulate what you did with it. Hopefully that answered the question, but thanks for the question.
Tons more. I don't know how much time you want
Yeah,
to
go ahead.
spend.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
We'll work through them. Yeah.
So
This is an important topic.
How do you feel about the table resumes?
Where you've got it blocks all over and like contact on the left side, if that's what you mean. So I've seen a lot of marketing professionals do this heavily. There's a lot of marketing professionals. I'll see their picture and a couple photos, and like the left side will list all these skills. And then the right side has a little bit of information and it's like 8-point font and can't read it. I don't go for that model really well because it's not about your picture. It's not about like you highlighting buzzwords. It should be you articulating what you did with your experience. Because if I'm a hiring manager with any amount of HR experience trying to hire the best candidates, I don't care what buzzwords you write on your resume. I'm looking for someone who articulated their value so that I want to interview them and then I want to hire them because they showed me what they're going to do for my business. There's probably not an industry out there that I couldn't create a Warren Cook resume for tomorrow that would look beautiful and look like I have 20 years experience, and I can't do any of it because I'll just throw buzzwords on there and I'll make up scenarios and I'll put all the fancy words and SEO and support this and market this. Doesn't matter. So I don't go for that. I will tell you too that when people apply in Europe or some other countries, they will share personal information, marital status, hobbies. They'll put their picture on there. I mean, I would avoid all that because people in this country have a tendency to discriminate. And so I would try to get away from that model. But the table itself, I mean, you can design it pretty nicely. I just wouldn't split it up where the left is just a bunch of buzzwords and then the content is harder to read.
So I guess a counter question to that, but what if you don't use the buzzwords used in the job description? How do you get your resume past the ATS?
So the ATS isn't looking at the words. The ATS actually can't screen the words. So no applicant tracking system will screen your content of your resume and then just eliminate you that way. They're using the questions to then get to a live person. So stage one is I'm going to put 4 or 5 screening questions in the ATS that are going to say, do you have this many years experience? Do you have this? Can you answer this? Those are where the system can auto reject. Past that, there's a human being looking at it. So if you get to that stage when the human being's looking at it, they could eliminate it for anything you want out there. But again, if we're going to get to this in a little bit, but I'll give you a quick example. Let's say one of the buzzwords they use is a team player. I don't want my resume to say team player anywhere. I want one of my bullets to say worked on ABC project, which was going to reduce our cost by $2 million this year. And I collaborated and engaged with various stakeholders across the organization to come up with the best solution, which we presented and got approved and then implemented. That tells you I'm a team player without using the buzzword team player. Anything you put on your resume or anything you say in an interview that I get to determine what it means is bad for you. So every single buzzword that you don't explain, you're letting the person on the other side of that table decide what you mean by it. And so if I'm interviewing 2 people and I ask somebody, do you have good communication skills? And someone says, yeah, I'm a great communicator. But the second applicant says, well, there was a recent project where there was a lot of debate about this. So what I did is I got the stakeholders together. We did some collaboration. There was engagement. I had to do a lot of listening. I didn't agree with some of it. We came to consensus and then we moved forward with implementing the project. I just proved to you I'm a good communicator instead of telling you a buzzword that makes you think I am. So you really have to think about what are you going to say and what are you going to write versus just trying to throw words out there because buzzwords don't do it anymore. Hopefully that answered that question.
This
Are there
next
any
one,
others? And then I'll go
yeah,
through.
yeah.
Yeah,
There's a handful more, but I think just for the sake of time, we'll just cap it with this last one here. So how do you be more descriptive but not wordy? I feel my resume has so many words.
Oh, kind of what I was just saying. So data dump everything you mean about whatever statement you're writing. So when you think about what was the situation, what was my action, what was the result for the business, the division, the department, the customer, the client, data dump all of that. It could be 3 paragraphs. Then start weeding it down to, okay, what was the actual challenge or obstacle? And then quickly into what was your action, and then what was the result? And you can get it very succinct into one sentence. You really narrow it back down to one sentence. And people that have 8, 10, 15 bullets, when I review it, I generally find out that they're repeating a skill set. So it's a different situation, but it's the same skill set they're articulating. You don't have to repeat the same skill set over and over. Maybe use a different skill and articulate it differently, and then you can kind of shorten that resume. But those are the strategies around it, and just talking it out where you kind of go, all right, if I'm on an interview and I have a minute to answer this question, how am I going to answer it? How am I going to present it? Okay, now how would I get it in writing just so that it's clear enough to promote the conversation? But we can talk more about that as we get closer to the end too. And then at the end, I can cover some of that as well. But it isn't easy. It's not an easy thing to do. But what I'm telling you about this whole presentation is if you take the time to do it, you've just differentiated from the other 99 applicants. If you learn how to articulate your value, and I asked 10 applicants, tell me about your communication skills, and you're the only one that articulates that value, that complexity, that proves you know how to do it versus telling me, you're the one that moves forward. So this isn't about being smarter or better or having a better resume or having different experience. The person who articulates and presents their experience more efficiently is the one who moves forward, because that's the one that the hiring panel resonates with. They're like, oh, if I worked with this woman or this man, wow, that would be really engaging. If I had an opportunity to work with this professional, that would be great. Look how they explain their experience. I think they would fit in this organization. I think they could grow us, add value. So that's what you're hoping for, not just proving you asked for this, I told you I have this. That matchmaking isn't the end of it nowadays because it's so competitive out there. There's such a competitive market that if I say I'm looking for a finance manager with a master's degree in finance and 10 years experience, I could find 1,000 applicants in an hour. So now how did that applicant differentiate? And then how do I pick out of that batch? Well, I'm looking for that one person that stands out. And the way you can stand out, in my opinion, is how you articulate and differentiate what you present. Because I can give two people, you could give me a resume of the same resume as someone else, and you can interview both of us, and I will present the information differently than them. Doesn't win every time, but I can present it in a way that that company goes, oh, all right, they get it. They get how they fit. They get how they add value. So I'll come back to that more at the end, but hopefully that answered some of those. And I appreciate the questions. And like I said, at the end, we'll make sure there's plenty of time for questions. Going back at the goal of the interview, right? So it's not about lengthy dissertations, which goes to the question that was just asked. How much information should be on your resume, right? Value statements. It shouldn't be about bragging. It shouldn't be about just look at all the things I've done over 10 years. They don't care about everything you've done. They care about whether or not you can prove to them during that short interview time and your resume, right, that you're going to add value to solving their problem, doing their job, their role. So if you talk about 8 different jobs you had and all the great things you've done, and they don't get that resonating of, oh, they've done a good job of showing how they bring that experience to do our job, right? And I will tell you that most organizations push and push and push in their culture. We're the team, us, we, whatever. An interview, there's no I in team, but my wife will tell me there's I in interview. So it's not about not selling yourself. You have to sell yourself, but you have to do it in a way that's articulate and adds value. For example, you shouldn't only say I when the person on the other side goes, well, it probably took 8 people to do that project, right? So you should start off with the team I was part of did X and my responsibility in the project was, or, hey, the team got together and did this and my contribution was X. So it's okay to still let them know it was part of a team because they'll find value in that. But you also need to highlight your role. I've been on interviews where they've told me so much information at the end, I'd say jokingly, but I was kind of serious. I'd say, can I meet your team? I'd love to hire them. And they'd be like, what? I don't understand. I say, well, you told me everything your team did and never told me what you did. And now we've wasted an hour of meeting each other. So it's really about how do you bring that together and articulate it. And then again, it's that communication. Everything you are today should be presented, not just this role, this role, this role, because everything you do as a human being adds to your knowledge, adds to your value, adds to your capabilities. I tell people that if you asked me a question today, I would have answered it different 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I might have said, fire them, do this, move this. Today, I'm like, wow, okay, I've been through that about 20 times now. That's probably not the best way I would do it today. Now I've learned from it. So just because you did a job 8 years ago, if you had to do that same job now, you probably do it differently because of what you've gained over the years. That's how I want you to think about it. Not the job you did, but the skills you brought forward with you. Articulating the value, right? It's critical. So your responses should be tied to what they're trying to accomplish, what the roles does. If you're an engineer and a mechanical engineer and they're trying to upgrade or scale up or put in a new product line, and you recognize that or you research that, you learned it, your conversation about your experience should show them how you could help them do that. Okay. If you're going in a finance type role and they're struggling financially or they're trying to scale or they're trying to acquire, you should talk about how your experience will help add value through that process. And that's in any role, right? How do you add that value to what they're doing? And how you're answering is just as important as your answer. Do you know how to make eye contact? Are you talking to everybody on the panel? Are you making sure that you're staying focused and not going on tangents, that you are giving information that meets the question? I've had people that go on tangents a lot, and it's hard. But now with Zoom and video interviewing, there's easy ways to put stickies all over the place. One of the things you want to make sure you do, which is a good strategy, is after you answer the question, before you keep babbling, if you have a tendency to do that, is to say, did I answer your question fully? Or would you like me to go into more detail? If they say, no, you've answered the question, great. You've just given them an opportunity to learn more about you with other questions. Or if they go, well, or you kind of sense they're like, go, great. Well, let me dive into that more, right? So you can control how you answer those questions and whether or not you've gone deep enough when you're in that process. So that's something really important. Were there any questions, Andy, on that specifically? Did any question come through just on the value proposition?
Nope, nothing on that.
Okay, great. So I kind of hate the whole term culture fit. We've got a great group of people on this call here, and you've probably heard about culture and everything's going on in society and the changes and the movements. But when an organization says you're not a fit, we're not going to hire you because you're not a fit, I kind of lose my mind, because everyone that's out there promoting diversity and inclusion and equity and justice and all these things, then they turn and tell you you're not a fit. And yet they're supposed to be exploring diversity of thought, right? And bringing in people from all walks of life to help add value to their organization. So the way you kind of navigate this is not understanding what they think their fit is, but just trying to learn about their culture. How do they communicate? How do they interact? What are they trying to promote, right? How do they engage each other? For example, if you walked into an organization that said, we're very collaborative and we're very engaging, and in order to get to the interview room, you walk down a hallway of closed office doors. You go in another organization, they tell you they're collaborative, engaging, and it's a huge open workspace, and there are round tables, and there's stations where they can go sit on a sofa and talk and collaborate. You know by just the artifacts around you that they're honest about their collaboration and what their culture may promote or present. So fitting is really trying to pick up on what have they presented to you and what is the culture they're trying to build and design. And a lot of times they'll talk about their culture online, but the reality is often very different. And make sure you can demonstrate that you do have diversity of thought, that you are a thought leader, that you are willing to listen to ideas and hear other people, and then alter your perspective based on what you've learned. Those are things they're really looking for more and more nowadays. And if you struggle demonstrating this, especially when there's generational gaps, these are areas you should focus on with a coach or your family or friends who you might be working with to help you improve your interviewing skills. On the flip side, and I see one question might have come in, so we'll hit that in a second. When things to not say or communicate, you don't want to suggest that you cause problems, that you instigate, that you do things that could cause disruption in the workplace, that you gossip. If you say things like, oh, and then when we had this meeting, so and so said this, and I had to tell management, like, bad approach. You shouldn't get involved with any of that, and certainly shouldn't articulate that in an interview. But the buzzwords here is where I was going to come and address this here, right? Be careful. Probably, if I ask for a show of hands, probably a lot of you have probably used the term fast learner or quick learner on an interview. It is literally one of my pet peeves on an interview that I hate that. And I will literally then say, you just told me you're a quick learner, explain that. And suddenly they're like stumped and we have a problem. If I ask you to think in your mind, what do you mean when you say quick learner? It's possible that you're going to say, well, I mean that I'm going to go into an organization, I'm going to read your policies, I'm going to read your practices, I'm going to go through your training, I'm going to look at your systems, I'm going to take everything you're sharing with me and my experience, and I'm going to ramp up and be productive and effective in a short period of time. So if I'm on an interview, do you want me to tell you I'm a quick learner, or do you want me to explain to you what I just did, which only took 15 seconds? You've got to think about that. Because if I just say I'm a quick learner, I've allowed the interviewer to decide what that means to them. But if I explain it, I'm telling them what it means to me. Okay. Another example. Do you use Microsoft Excel? Yeah. I'm an expert at it. Okay. Expert. I don't know. I start saying things like, do you do concatenations? Do you do lookups? Do you do VSUMs? Do you do calculations? Do you write macros? And suddenly it all falls apart. They're not an expert. But if they say, well, you know what, in Excel, I've used Excel in almost every job I've been in. And what I've done is I've learned and mastered the skills and techniques and the capabilities of the software that allow me to be really effective and efficient in my role, whether it's doing data entry, data analysis, reporting, or calculations. Which answer do you want? If you're that person trying to present your Excel skills, what do you want to tell them? I'm an expert, or do you want to describe it? I do good at it, but whatever. Again, neither answer is wrong. Neither answer is false. And I'm never going to tell any applicant to lie. But if you sit back and think about what you've actually done and then can find a way to regurgitate that through processing it and saying it in an articulate manner, you win out. You can win out every time, because those other 9 people that are interviewing versus you being the 10th are not going to present it the same way you do most of the time. So again, both people might come to an interview with their application saying Excel. One of them says, I'm really good at Excel. The other explains how they used it and tied it together to other skills like presenting, analysis, forecasting, right? Now they've shared even more because they understand the idea of differentiating and articulating. Was there a question, Andy? I saw 30 went to 31 there. Was there one about culture?
It was nope, it was just kind of like an adding to one of your statements. So no questions have come in.
Oh, okay, great. Hopefully positive. All right, moving on. So interview success. Let's talk about real practical strategies here and go through this. So behavioral interviewing is a hot topic. Hopefully you've heard of it. If not, this is going to be very helpful. I'm an IO psychologist, so I study workplace behavior. And there are types of questions that you can be asked. And I still use some traditional questions, but for the most part, I do things from a behavioral perspective. Behavioral interviewing simply says that I'm looking at how you do your work. Now, I don't want to know the ages of the people on this call, but I've got a little white in my beard here. And years ago, there used to be commercials on TV in which at the end of a financial commercial, Dean Witter, Charles Schwab, they were investment commercials. An attorney would come on and say, past performance is not indicative of future results. Invest wisely, right? So that was their legal disclaimer saying it's really on you. That resonates pretty true across most industries, except in the IO psychology world. IO psychologists believe that how you behave in the workplace is extremely indicative of how you perform in the workplace in the future. So if you are used to analyzing a problem, collaborating with team members, presenting alternative solutions, and then coming to consensus and solving a problem in your past job, you probably are going to approach it the same way in your next job. Same goes for if you ignore your peers, if you don't communicate well, if you're disrespectful to management, you probably don't do it differently in the next job. And so we try to ask questions now on interviews that go to the behaviors and demonstrate you've done something. I'm going to give you 2 examples here, and hopefully they resonate. But again, we can cover more in the question time. All right. Sometimes people will say, how would you handle an irate customer or client? How would you? It's hypothetical. A 4-year-old can answer that question and they'd be hard proven to say it's wrong because it's how would you do it? So I can answer anything I want, but it doesn't show you that I've actually ever done it. So when I ask a question, I ask it more behaviorally, and I would ask something like this. Can you give me a recent example when you had to deal with an irate customer or client? What was the situation? What action did you take? And what was the result? It's very hard to lie in that answer. It's very hard to fake it. You actually have to be able to articulate it, that you prove that you did it through storytelling. And most of your success in a behavioral interview and in everything I've shared with you is storytelling. Here's what was going on in the organization. Here's what I did about it. Here's what my team and I did about it. Here was the impact, and here's why it was valuable to the customer. Here's why it was valuable to management. Here's why it was valuable to my team. Okay. Second one is there, they might say, do you communicate well? Do you interact with other people? Are you a good communicator? You could answer yeah, or I could ask that question that way, but it's a poor question. If I say, give me a recent example of where you were able to influence others to solve a complex problem in your workplace. Wow. If you think about it and you can articulate, yeah, here was the situation. I presented the business case. I changed their mind and we were successful. You've proven to me that you're a good communicator or have good communication skills versus if I just say, can you communicate well? Right. So one thing I want to highlight here is there's a lot of bad interviewers. Right? They've never been trained on interviewing. Maybe they don't have HR experience. Maybe they're a hiring manager of a small business. They don't know how to interview at all. Always try to turn your answer into a behavioral response, even if the question isn't behavioral. Something as simple as, give me your top 3 strengths. I never say A, B, C. I always tell a story about each skill set, and rarely have I ever been cut off. Because when I tell the story of my skill and the value of that skill, I've just differentiated from the other people who just say ABC. Okay. So learn how to really take advantage of how you respond to enhance your ability to get that offer, to move forward in the process. So here's some quick techniques. Okay. Now, the first one, I am terrible at the first one when I'm doing a video interview. I'm always looking at the cameras and never like the pictures and never the camera itself. But a way to get around this, if you're doing an in-person interview and there's more than one, make eye contact with everybody during the interview process. Even if the person to your left asks the question, look at the other people when you're responding. On a video interview, what you want to use and leverage is their names. So you might not be able to show them you're looking at them, but most people have their names, as you all do, some name, something on the screen. Use their name. Yes, Mike. Yes, Tina. Yes, this. Let me go into that further, Mary, right? Like, that's how you can make them feel good that they're also included in the interview and your responses. So that's a way to engage. A real good tip if you're nervous or scared or not sure of the answer is ask them to repeat the question. And you see, take notes is the next one. These kind of blend. So especially on a video, it's pretty easy, right? Take notes while they're asking questions and then just say, oh, could you repeat that question? Especially if it's a multi-part question. And then in order to give your brain time to find the best answer, especially if you're not familiar with what they're asking, is to go, okay, so you first want to know how I did this, and then you want to know the result of that, and then you want to know the technology. Great. Okay, so okay, great. And then get started. Believe it or not, subconsciously, your brain's already working on a response, but give yourself that time to do it. And it's not a bad idea to ask as frequently as you need it, but especially on multi-part questions. The reason I say take notes is they're taking notes. They're writing things about you. You might want to jot down questions you want to ask. You might want to jot, that based on what they said. You might want to jot down notes for yourself. You might want to jot down triggers that you remember. Don't go on tangent. Make sure you ask this, cover this, sorry, whatever it is. So take notes, and I'm going to give you a trick as to why. Incorporate other experiences. KSAO means knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics. Sometimes you'll see a KSAO section on a job posting. It'll say minimum requirements are this, and then it'll have all these other skills and requirements they're looking for. Those are the KSAOs. So if someone, I'll use Excel as an example again. If someone simply says, give me your experience with Excel, if I say, well, I do data entry by pulling data from this ABC system, and then I do analysis of the data. I provide forecasting, and I generate a report that goes to the management team. And then I have a quarterly meeting with this person to do X. So you told them about Excel, but you brought in communication skills, data analysis skills, forecasting, reporting, presentation skills. So when you think about your response, try to leverage on what platform did you do it? In what environment did you do it? Who did you do it for? Who was the recipient of the data? Who did you collaborate with in order to put that information together? Who's going to use the information? Okay. When you can kind of build that into your response, and it still doesn't make it 20 minutes long, but when you build it into your response, you add so much value and you differentiate. And then the last piece there is avoiding tangents I mentioned earlier, but a great tactic is to simply say, have I answered your question? Yeah. Okay, great. No, I'm not sure. But if you'd like more information or more details, I can go into it. Because once you go on a tangent, sometimes they sit back and let you go. And maybe they had 12 questions to ask you and they only get to 8 of them. Right. And now you wonder why you didn't get the offer, because the other people got to all 12 questions. So those are some things there. Andy, any questions on this slide on the techniques come up?
Yeah, there's a couple that came through.
Sure.
Some good insights kind of elaborating on that. One was, what's the best answer to what's your greatest weakness question?
Ah, I think there's more value in answering weaknesses or failures than there are in your successes. When I ask that question, I don't trick the person, but I say, share with me 1 or 2 things you'd like to get better at, and you know that usually is a weakness. And if I ask about, tell me about a recent failure, it's more important for that person to be humble, because if someone says I've never had a failure, I'm not hiring them. But be humble, share an experience. What was the situation? What was your action? What was the result? But in the failure response or the weakness response, you're going to demonstrate how you learned from it, what you do differently. Now, I've never had or heard in my career someone say, tell me about a weakness today. They generally don't go that far. They just say, tell me about one of your weaknesses or tell me about a recent failure, right? They might not say that happened today. If someone asks me a weakness, I literally go back to supervising. And I've supervised and managed hundreds of people. But I'll say, you know, there was a point in my career where I wasn't very effective at people leadership and supervising, but I worked with mentors and courses and training where I learned how to set expectations, set goals, evaluate people, communicate feedback to them, hold them accountable, and then develop them professionally. So, you know, early on, I wasn't able to do that, but that was definitely a weakness, but no longer. So now I showed them that I learned from things, that I can reflect on it, but I can honestly say I'm not good at something. If there's a failure situation, I always have a few of those failures in my back pocket ready, because it's more important to say this happened, this failed, and this is how I fixed it or was still successful or I overcome that challenge, because they're thinking, well, when they come work here, it's going to hit the fan one day. I want to know what they're going to do when it does. Well, when you can articulate that you've overcome that in the past or that you've beaten that challenge, that's a good way. Now, if they're asking you a skill set that you don't have, right? And it's more of a transferable skill, and we're going to cover a slide on that in a minute, than just a direct answer. Do you have experience with ABC software? Well, no, but I've experience with these other 8 CRM systems. So there's transferable skills there, right? So sometimes they get hung up on specific brands or names or types of things, and we want to work through the transferable aspect of those skills. But don't shy away from the weakness or failures. Have prepared responses about what the weakness was and what you've done about it. Even if it's people leadership, right? They say, "Oh, I see that you don't, you haven't been a manager before. Is that something you've done?" No, that's actually an area of weakness. But what I've done to prepare myself is I've taken on projects and practices and initiatives that allow me to work with other people. They gave me leadership opportunities, both academically and in industry. I've done it, right? You could still show that you've recognized the gap and you've done something about it. If you simply just say, here's my weakness or here was the failure, and you don't follow up with what you learned from it, you can run into an issue. Hopefully that answered that one, Andy. So video interviewing tips, and then we're almost done with the slides and I can jump back into questions. So be aware of your background. I've had people actually during COVID interview with me in a nightgown and slippers, and they're like, well, I work remote, so what does it matter? It was like, okay. How far away you sit from the camera. You want to be very careful that you're not way up in it like this, but you're not so far away that they can't really see your reaction. So that's important. Mind your posture. I move around a lot. I do other things. So sometimes I got to grab a pen to remind myself, like, keep my hands still. But understand that those mannerisms and hand movements sometimes can, bother the camera, right? So be careful of that. The advantage, though, on video is you can have notes everywhere. All around your computer, or on your wall, or behind, or in front of you, you can have notes to say, don't go on a tangent. Remember behavioral. Do this, do that. Like, you can remind yourself because it's not visible to them. Dress appropriately. I don't think 3-piece suit and tie is the way to go anymore. I rarely see that at all. Generally, it's a nice blouse or a top or something for females. And then for males, when they're interviewing, they're looking for just shirt and tie or a collared shirt or something. But I would ask in advance what their culture or their environment is to try to understand what's expected. When I would work with IT firms in the past, I remember they told me, please come in just jeans and a t-shirt. Don't show up anymore. in a suit. But I'm not recommending that for the interview, but like just know your audience and know what level they're comfortable with, because you also don't want them to think, like I said earlier, that you don't fit, right? So you still want to be professional and aligned with them. And then always test your technology. I don't know how any of you use Teams, but it seems like every time I try to do a Teams meeting, it wants to restart, reboot, or refresh. Zoom does that from time to time. There's some other platforms out there that people are using in Google Hangouts and meetings and all, but always not the morning of. I would try the night before, make sure, is it working? Is it there? When someone sends you a Zoom link, you can log into it anytime just to make sure the connection works. But test your technology ahead of time. You don't want to have that and ruin the opportunity when it's happening. So 2 quick slides on leadership and transferable skills. Okay. When you think about leadership, we really want to make sure that if you're going to present yourself as a leader or former leader, you better be able to discuss systems, people, and processes. So if you go in an interview and you're like, I led this and I was a manager of this and I led that, and you can't explain how your school or business or environment worked, how they made money, how they profited, what was revenues like, what were their operations like, what was their services and products, you're not going to be able to sell the fact that you were a leader. Just because you were in a group of 3 people and you led those 3 people doesn't mean you have the leadership skills of the business or division or whatever. And that's what you're trying to sell. You're trying to articulate your leadership skills, that you understand how the business works. You understand how the team, department, function, activity works. So you should be able to make sure you discuss systems, operational processes, and people. When you can articulate how that works and that you strategically led or guided or directed that, it's very helpful if you can do that. And you also want to make sure that when you're the whole interview, you're not only speaking tactically. I did this, I did this, I did this, versus I prepared the strategy and had the team do this. I rolled this out and this group did this. So those types of the language you use and semantics you use during the interview are going to be very clear to the person interviewing you, whether or not you are the individual contributor or tactical person, or whether you have strategic leadership skills. And then from a transferable skills perspective, when you haven't done, you can't do everything in life, but these are some examples here. And I will be sharing this slide deck with Andy to send out to everybody that participated, by the way. But these items at the bottom here, and there's so many of them, but these are some examples of things you should think about. You don't just say I do strategic planning. Again, we're talking about you describe it, but these are areas that are transferable very easily. The technology, the platform, the industry, the product or service doesn't matter if you can articulate these skills. These are more the softer skills, the leadership skills. These are the things you use to help get your work done. Okay. So these are things I really want you to make sure you're thinking about when you go through the process and you run into a question where you're like, well, you know what? When I applied for the job, there was this one bullet that I really don't have a lot of experience in that industry or with that product. If they ask me about it, how am I going to answer it? I'm going to use transferable skills and make sure that I can relate how I've done something very similar, just with a different product, different industry, different solution, or whatnot. And then we'll talk about closing the interview, because this is key to some questions earlier about the questions you ask. So I've never been on an interview where I didn't say, do you have any questions for us? Now, a lot of times they'll say no, and they can't wait to run out of the interview because they were so nervous. But you should always take an opportunity to ask questions, and ask intelligent questions that help you decide whether or not you want to move forward. Because they call and make you an offer, you don't have to take it. If you found out that it was a really uncomfortable interview and the people you were talking to were really terrible and you didn't like it just didn't match up, you don't want to do that. But the questions you ask should be about the role, about the position, about the culture, about the environment. You shouldn't say, why do you like working here? How long have you been working here? What do you do? Like who cares? You shouldn't be asking how many other applicants are there. Because if you think you're the best, most qualified, what do you care if there's 1 or 100? Doesn't matter. Okay. You should be focused on things that are going to help you understand, how is communication for this role? What is the development opportunities in this role? What were the greatest challenges? Is the technology up to par? If there's change recommendations, how do you do that in this role? What the prior incumbent still with the organization? Can we leverage them for knowledge transfer? Ask questions that help you make really good decisions about if you had the job, if you had the opportunity. But here's a trick. The reason why I say take notes is a few pages back. If you're in person, you got to do this a few pages back. If it's video, you can do it wherever you want. But when I have a notepad, so I've got a notepad, and a few pages back, I write about 15 questions that I want to know about this job. Now, that might not ask all 15, but I write usually 15 to 20 questions about the role, and I'll ask different people different questions if it's a panel. But the trick here is when they say, do you have any questions? This is what you do. Oh, actually, absolutely. I have some questions. Let me get to my questions that I have for you. Okay, so, well, this one, Mary already answered. Tom, you answered that one. And Joe, you took care of that. Okay, my first question is, I will tell you the egos that you just stroked in making the interview panel feel great that they miraculously answered your questions already. They might not have, but there's some feel where you set them at ease because when they turn it over to you to ask questions, there's a nervousness on the interview panel side of like, what are they going to ask? And are we allowed to answer them? And are they going to ask something crazy? So now you've kind of set them at ease and you've stroked their ego a little bit, and then you go into your questions. And then at some point after you ask a few, you just say, can I continue? May I ask a few more? Because I'd really like to understand X, Y, and Z. Okay. No matter what, though, it's important to ask how you did on the interview. So I find so many people over the years would call me after they go on the interview and say, hey, Warren, how'd I do? And I go, what? Where are you? They say, I'm out in the parking lot. I just finished my interview. I say, well, how would I know how you did? Weren't you there? I wasn't there. And I started having to think, like, how do I help this person figure it out? So you want to ask how you did on the interview, but I caution everybody on this call, it's about understanding your question. You're not asking if you're getting the offer, because 9 times out of 10, one, they won't tell you during the interview. They have other people they're still interviewing. They're not the decision maker. There's an approval process. So asking that is a waste of time, unless it's one-on-one with an owner and you're kind of like ready to close the deal. But most of the time you can't do that. So instead, you want to find out for your own professional development, for your own mental health, for feeling like, how did I do in the interview? Did I do poorly? Did I do well? Are there things I should have changed? And so what I would say is ask this question. Now, use your own nomenclature, whatever you're comfortable with, but I've been preaching this for 20 years. From what we've discussed so far today, is there anything that would prevent me from moving forward in the process? Pretty simple. You can ask it any way you want, but from anything we've talked about today, is there anything that would prevent me from moving forward in the process? Now, most of the things I'll tell you to ask in a behavioral way, like don't ask yes and no questions, but this is specifically yes and no on purpose. They're either going to say no, there's nothing that you answered poorly, so you just jump on that. Great, when's the next stage of the process? Should I be expecting an offer? Is there going to be another round of interviews? And just take control and say, I'm available on Tuesday, right? Whatever you need to do. But if they hesitate, or you read the room, you get some hesitation, or they say, yeah, they might say, yeah, I really didn't get an understanding of how deep you've gone in this technology. Just jump in there and add what you can about your experience using that technology or whatever that topic is, right? Don't say, may I please tell you more? Just do it, because they're not going to go, yeah, tell us more. I've been in interviews where I've actually turned around on the decision of the panel because the person was smart enough to ask the question and then they dove into it. And it's not because we didn't ask the question well or they didn't answer well. We were so involved in our conversation, our discussion, that we didn't go deep enough. But now at the end, we had that hesitation, and now they've addressed it. So take the opportunity to do that. Now, I will tell you that after 1 or 2 times, if they keep saying, yes, there's an issue, yes, there's an issue, stop. Like, it's not happening. But I've had people say, after the 6th time, they told me to leave. Like, yeah, okay. So once or twice, just to try to add that little more, because the thank you letter afterwards, the thank you email, is not where you add information about the interview. Get contact information if you can, and thank them for the process. Always at the beginning, thank you for your time. At the end, thank them for the time. And you should send a thank you letter afterwards via email. People are like, an hour later, a day later, a week later, just send one. I wouldn't send it the same day, but by the next day, if it's after the next day, they're already interviewing 25 other people and moving forward, and they're going to forget about it. So always, but for me, it's always the next day. I make sure that email goes out the next day thanking them. And it should be, thank you for your time. I believe I'm a fit for this role. I'm excited or anxious or intrigued or whatever it is. Here's how you can reach me, and this would be my availability. And please contact me. Here's my phone number, my email address, my blood type, my like any way that you can be contacted. Let them know that's where it's at. It's not where you say, oh, you asked about this, and I think I could do this, and I thought about this, and pages, because it's not required for us to even look at your thank you letter. It's not part of the process. It actually makes it an inconsistent process. So you can send it, but just say thank you, and I'm interested and available. So before I go real quickly through the offer process, and we're almost at time, Andy, were there any questions on that?
Not on that specific topic, no.
Okay. So the offer process itself, you should expect a verbal offer and then you get something in writing, usually called a conditional offer letter. The reason I want to highlight that you're going to get a verbal offer is because a lot of us HR professionals don't want to rewrite the offer letter 7 times as we're negotiating. Everything's negotiable. Your pay is negotiable. Okay. Your paid time off is negotiable. The availability of the role, the location, everything's negotiable. People call and say, am I allowed to negotiate? Yeah. That's kind of your only time to negotiate. But once you verbally accept, that usually means they're going to trigger that conditional offer in writing, and that allows them to start the background pre-employment process once they get a verbal acceptance or a written acceptance on a conditional offer. Okay. Before that, they shouldn't be doing any of that pre-employment checks. And be very careful of the offer letter versus someone who says they're sending you an employment agreement. A lot of people interchange those, but an employment agreement is generally a contract that's going to have parties to the contract, breach of contract, and it'll have a set period of time, which means it's not at will. On the offer process side, the job offer is basically an at will 99.9% of the time. Make sure from a strategic perspective of getting that offer, negotiating what you want, set expectations from the beginning. Don't tell them at the beginning you're looking for 55,000, and when the offer comes, tell them you're still looking for 75,000. Be consistent through the process, know your worth, know your value from the beginning, and stick with that. You're going to negotiate, but stick in that range that you were targeting in the beginning. Otherwise, they could feel that you've just misrepresented. And then understand HR will love to negotiate with you, especially if you're asking for more money. So if you say, listen, I don't want 70,000, I'm looking for 75, they may say, well, what about a $5,000 sign-on bonus? Because it's a one-time expense, doesn't impact the payroll taxes, doesn't impact the 401k, benefits, and other things. So know the reverse is if you ask for more money and they're like, nope, we can't do it. Nope. Other people in the organization have equity. Nope, nope, nope. Say, great. Well, how about just give it to me as a sign-on? Sometimes there'll be an agreement saying you got to pay it back if you leave, but you can get that same dollars often because it's a one-time expense and they're much more likely to go ahead and do that than not. And then the last thing here is post-pandemic, squeeze it in here right on the dime here, is companies are now posting jobs saying hybrid or on-site and remote and all those types of things. Some of these postings are misleading from people that I talk to and even organizations, right? They may say, we'll start remote, but you got to come on site, or you got to be on site 2 or 3 days a week. And we're going to give you an accommodation to work from home. The world has already proven that a lot of jobs can be performed remotely. That doesn't mean an employer still has to do it, but I would make sure you're very clear on the front end what they mean, because too often I'm finding people saying, oh, well, now they said I can work from home 1 day a week. Well, if you're fully remote and you don't plan on commuting somewhere, you might not even want that job if it's going to cost you to get there and you didn't expect to go on site. So really clarify that. Be prepared on interviews when it is remote to articulate your experience working from home. Meaning, yes, I have a full office setup. Yes, I have a printer set up. Yes, I have Wi-Fi and internet connection. Yes, I have a secure area where no one can get the data or information. Yes, I lock down my machines and I use password protected and this and that. No one else uses the computer system. I know how to manage my time throughout the day. I understand what it means to be non-exempt and clock in and out while I'm remote. So when you can articulate those things, there's another way to get a leg up on showing you have that expertise versus just saying, yes, I know how to work remote. So rather than telling them, really demonstrate it. Share your expectations. So if you're expecting to only go in the office 1 day a week, make sure they know that. I mean, it could cost you the offer if that's not what they're looking for, but the sooner you figure that out, much better. Stay consistent. I've had people say, oh yeah, I don't mind commuting the hour and a half to work. I go, so 3 hours away from your life and family every day, you're okay with that over, a year? And usually they go, well, not really. I just need a job. Okay, really think about it, because it's hard on you, mental health, family, and other things when you make an arrangement and you're not really able to stick with it. Okay, so make sure you understand that. And the other part here at the bottom there is like technologies. Like when they ask you how you communicate, if you've used Slack, if you use project management tools, if you used Zoom and other things that have enabled you to collaborate with others in a remote space, that's what you want to highlight too when they ask about your remote experience. The last slide just says questions. I know we're at time, Andy. I'm sorry. So however you want to wrap up your piece, but I am happy to answer any other questions that came in and make sure if the audience has more, we get them answered, because that's the whole point, right? Helping them get their questions answered. But
absolutely.
That's all I've got today.
Yeah, absolutely, Warren. I'm good sticking around. I do want to be mindful of everyone's time. So if you do have to drop off, no problems there. I did post a link in our in the chat section here, just highlighting where this event will be posted after the fact. It's on our YouTube page. So if you wanted to go back, reference, check it out there. And then, yes, Warren will send me this slide deck, and I'll be sure to send that out to all the folks who had registered. A couple questions came in regarding cover letters. Are they a thing of the past? Do they still exist? What is the role of a cover letter? And should
Perfect.
people be utilizing it? Yeah.
That's a great question. So keep in mind, when you read a job posting, they sometimes are giving you instructions on what the process is. If you don't follow the process, they can leverage that as a reason to exclude you, and it would be compliant. Even if your resume shows you're the most qualified person, if they say must attach resume and cover letter with salary expectations, and you don't do that, they can eliminate you just for not following their process. So that's when they define the process as cover letter and. Okay. And by the way, if you don't know when you're on this call, it's illegal in many states now to ask about past compensation. For gender equity, for just doing the right thing, no application should ask you your salary on a prior job or compensation rates. And during an interview in several states, California, Colorado, Arizona, Delaware, Maine, and now it's becoming more common practice for HR professionals, you don't ever have to reveal what you made before, because that's how they discriminate against you. Okay. And that's how gender equity is promulgated inappropriately. But you can be asked, what is your goal? What is your target? What are you looking to make? And be honest and give a range with that. And there's more strategies on that too. But so if they ask for a cover letter that says, hey, please include your salary expectations, look at the job posting, because again, many states require a job posting to have the range, and say, my target is within your range, or my target is X. But if it's not asking for a cover letter as part of the process, you can certainly still do it. When I'm going through a job applicant tracking system, I never even look at them. Don't even care. Unless it's been required, I don't look at them at all. But it's not a bad thing to do just to show and differentiate a little bit on your own, but it's not a requirement. And if I read what's different between the application and a cover letter, I mentioned this earlier about resumes, is there's no consistency. There's no consistency in how someone writes a cover letter. So if I give credence to a cover letter and I don't get cover letters from all the other applicants, I don't really have a consistent practice in following the uniform guidelines of selection. So I would add a cover letter, but it should be very simple. This is my name. I found this posting, or I found this opportunity. It aligned with my background experience. I'm very interested in moving forward, and I'm happy to schedule a time to interview with you. Thank you. My resume is attached, or I filled out the application. So I would still do it, but in this day and age, when I'm applying for jobs, or I'm working with people that are applying, they might be applying to 300 or 400 jobs a month. Right? I'm not writing 300 cover letters. I have a standard that I'll just say, here's the template, and I'll just attach it over and over and over. That just says, here's who I am, here's my experience, here's what I'm looking for, boom. Because if you get into the, I'm applying for this particular job at this particular company, this is why I'm a fit, the amount of time you're spending doing that, you probably could have applied to 3 or 4 more jobs. So hope that answers it. But if the process requires it, do it. If it doesn't require it, I don't really think that it's a bad thing if you don't.
So building on that really quickly, Warren, too, if cover letter is listed as optional on the application process, would you take that as it is not optional? You should include that then, based on what you just
I would, yeah.
Okay.
I would. I can't remember the last time I gave any value to either a thank you letter or a cover letter. A thank you letter's value is, oh, okay, out of 8 people we interviewed, 1 person sent the thank you letter. So, hey, seems like they're on the ball. But it doesn't change our decision making. It's just like, well, okay, they did that. Cover letter, if it's required and I don't see it, boop, they're gone. If it's not required, I don't even look at it. I honestly don't even go into the system and look at it. It's not worth my time to look at 100 cover letters.
Gotcha. That is good insight. Next question. So something I have had a lot of recent have happened a lot recently is recruiters will ask you what your starting minimum is right off the bat. I've done this before, even going into an interview, but I'm always scared that I will say too much or too little since they were asking that as their first question. Any insight in regards to that and how to handle that?
Yeah, lots of insight. So first of all, take every effort possibly not to share your compensation expectations. Now, I know I just said on application thing like that they might ask it, but so if I get on with it, and recruiter, meaning the corporate recruiter, if you're working with a talent acquisition firm, sometimes they're going to ask you because they have, ranges and money they're trying to make off of placing you somewhere. So they know if someone asks too high or too low, they've got to work it out. So it's a little different approach when you're working with a staffing firm, but if you're working directly with the employer and a recruiter or recruiting professional from them is working with you, if right off the bat they say, what's the minimum you'll take on this? I'll say, oh, are you about to make an offer? And it stumps them. And they go, no, I want to know the minimum you will take. I'll go, well, it depends. We haven't even gone through the process. I don't even know if you're the organization that's the right fit for me, or I'm the right fit for you. I saw you posted the range of here to here. Is that the range that you're actually hiring in? Yeah. I applied. I'm okay with that range. Don't let them push you around and beat you up, because think about it. That's how they're going to treat you when you work there. If they're that rude and they're that disrespectful right off the bat pushing you, then you should say immediately, great, what's the first task? What's the first project? When am I getting my first performance review? They're going to say, we don't know. And I say, well, I don't know yet what my comp expectation is going to be, other than it's within your range. Because they just try to bully people, and also they're trying to find out, like, all right, how easily can I get you? Well, those people are not the best practices professionals anymore. People that are following best practices and trying to, not discriminate and try to treat everyone fairly and equally are looking at the value you can bring to the organization. And then they have a salary range that they're going to offer you fairly and equitably with the rest of their team. If I started an interview and they asked me, what's the minimum you'll take? I'll say, listen, I think we need to stop, because you're trying to get to something before I've even evaluated you or you and me. So why are we talking about compensation? You posted a range. That I'm okay with that range. Let's move forward. If they're not willing to, I'm telling you, you're probably better off if you just exit, because that's a representation of their organization. Just like your resume and everything is a representation of you, that's who you'd have to deal with and work with going forward. And, it's not usually not a good outcome. I don't know if that answered your question, but if they keep pushing though, I say, are you making me an offer? I'm fine in the range that you're offering. So those are the ways you can answer it today. You don't have to give a specific number, because then it's adversarial. They're not, it's not a good scenario. So, other ones?
No, I unfortunately, that is all the time we have for. I think that's a great way to stop there, though. I think a lot of praise.
Can I share one more thing with the group?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So on the slide deck, the information's there. It'll be there when Andy puts it. If anybody wants to have their resume reviewed, I don't charge for this, but if you want your resume reviewed and you're not afraid of red ink or red responses to just give you some guidance, you are welcome to send me your resume and I'll get back to you, and I'll send you the information just to, like, what are my thoughts on how you've articulated a resume. So just wanted to throw that out there because I'm happy to do it.
I love that. Thank you so much for that, Warren. Thank you all for taking time out of your day to join us here. Such a wealth of information. I know that I learned a lot today, and I'm certainly going to go back and poke through this as well. Again, one last time, thanks so much for that, Warren. Look for the recording on our YouTube page. About a week after the event is when we're able to get up there, and we will go ahead and cap it there. We will see you all next time. Take care.